Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a happy Halloween to you all. Okay, so I'm a little late. Things got busy around here, so sue me. As we're all getting into the scary season 3 days ago, I thought it'd be appropriate to talk about a horror-themed Lupin III episode. Which, considering a lot of Lupin adventures veer off into supernatural or monster-themed exploits, should be easy enough to find, even if there's nothing in this series that I would classify as straight-up scary. The gang certainly gets into some high-tension situations, but as far as pure horror, that's a little more rare. That even extends to the episode we're looking at today, Welcome to the Haunted Hotel from Part 4. Taking place, as you'd expect, in a haunted hotel, this episode appropriately premiered on September 13th? I really am late for this one. Plus, I was thinking about this episode recently and wanted to give it a rewatch, especially since my full look at Part 4 is still a long way away. So does it deliver on the spooks and scares you expect from a haunted hotel tour? Well, not really, no, and it doesn't deliver much else either. On a dark and stormy night, Lupin and Jigen travel to a castle-turned-hotel in the middle of nowhere to steal a painting by Michelangelo, among other treasures left behind by a daughter of the Godieri family. She was executed by a rival family on her wedding day along with the guests, and years later, the hotel has gained a haunted reputation. With a rival treasure hunter and her bumbling henchmen also on the trail, Lupin and Jigen settle in for the night until Jigen encounters the ghost of the bride and several other paranormal forces running around the hotel. As Jigen scares himself silly, Lupin actually does some treasure hunting, exploring a hidden passage that guides him through the castle, meeting up with the apparent spirit of Carla Gautieri, who claims to be the bride's sister. Along the way, there's a sinister money-making plot, an anticlimactic showdown between the thieves, almost no horror elements whatsoever, and Jigen almost pissing on the floor. Happy Halloween, everybody! In retrospect, I'm not quite sure why I chose this episode to talk about for Halloween, because it barely has anything scary in it. You'd think it might, considering the gothic exterior of this place, which was at one point the castle of the Godieri family, but after the first 5 minutes or so, it's more or less a straightforward treasure hunt. About the only consistent horror element is the constant pitter-patter of rain in the background, but even that feels so minor in relation to the story on display. It has the haunted house setup, but not the vibe, and it is revealed early on that this place isn't actually infested with ghosts, so it relies on the strength of the plot to carry it forward. Unfortunately, that plot is not very exciting. You can very easily figure out what's really going on, so there's no mystery to solve, and the actual treasure hunt is pretty lacking. Partially, that's the characters' fault, as they aren't given much to play with. I like how Jigen is the conduit to all the supernatural happenings in this episode, as he's usually far more of a realist and pragmatic figure in the Lupin gang. So seeing all these seemingly paranormal events from his point of view, especially his seeing is believing attitude, is interesting, and it's also something he directly calls out early on. If Lupin were the one experiencing all of this, it wouldn't work as well. He's been the believer on too many other quests for it to feel right. That said, I can't say I'm a fan of how Jigen is portrayed here. He is too much of a bumbling fool. It's kind of funny how he gets sloppy drunk and spends most of the episode denying everything that he's seen, and then pestering the manager and the girl about their scheme dressed as the knight that scared him earlier, but he ultimately feels pretty wasted in this plot. No pun intended. Lupin takes over the adventure midway through to explore the actual hidden treasures of the hotel and becomes his typical, competent self. He's kind-hearted in this one, which is appropriate because he's dealing with a child for most of his adventure. I actually really like that he's concerned about Carla running around the bowels of the hotel when he thinks that she's just an actress. That is really touching. If you like the Cagliostro style of Lupin as a character, you will enjoy Lupin in this episode, and considering how Cagliostro-ish the setting is, you'll probably like it on that front too. Carla herself is a cute little kid, not as impish as some other Lupin youngsters, and very sheltered, which is fair given her backstory, and it acts as a nice anchor for Lupin to remind himself of why he does what he does by the end. Adolfo the butler and her daughter are not interesting at all. They are barely even villains, just kind of plot obstacles that the gang basically forgets about by the end. Then you have Mama and her 2 henchmen, who are your standard dumbass criminal archetypes, with one angry and incompetent guy, and one goofy and super incompetent guy, and their dominating boss who is not given nearly enough development to stand out. You know, like Cruella de Vil and her two goons, the Fratellis from the Goonies, and if you want an anime example, Dola and her gang of pirates from Castle in the Sky, but, you know, not as good. Real quick, let's talk about the English dub for this episode, which has the usual caveats regarding Part 4's dub. That being that the opening theme and credits are different, the music is completely changed and not for the better, the cast are all very solid, and the side characters have that slight tinge of an accent in case the audience needs to be reminded that this takes place in Italy. Can't say I care for the acting of the Mama gang, it feels very amateur comedy sketch-ish, if you get my meaning. The butler and the daughter are fine, and Brianna Knickerbocker does well enough as the precocious Carla, so nothing to really worry about on the voice acting front. This episode in particular has a very repetitive dub script, not much change from the Japanese original, which I appreciate, but because of the need to match the lip flaps, they often double back on things they just said to fill in the void. And damn, the redone soundtrack really ruins this episode. As you might already know, the Italian dub, which the international Part 4 versions are based on, featured a different soundtrack by jazz band Papique, I might be pronouncing that wrong, which was certainly not at all controversial. Now, I've got nothing against Papique's music in a bubble, some of it is good on its own, but in this episode particularly, it feels way too on the nose. The scene in the treasure room, for example, feels way too sappy with that piano piece, even if it is a nice song on its own. It is a shame that the characters of the week are a letdown, considering that this is squarely a Lupin and Jigen adventure this time. There's no Fujiko, no Goemon, and no Zenigata, and to be fair, this episode really wouldn't benefit from their inclusion, but there isn't enough in here to fill the gap. Especially when it desperately wants to be Castle of Cagliostro. As I said before, Welcome to the Haunted Hotel reeks of trying to recreate those Cagliostro feelings in its setting, characters, and sense of adventure, and it does so to its detriment. The direct comparisons are obvious. I mean, this is quite literally a story about Lupin infiltrating a castle owned by a shady figure and guiding a younger woman along the way. Although this time, it's the tragic bride's younger sister, which I guess is a new twist on it, but not one that makes this worth looking at. But it's also aping Cagliostro's style and mixing it, unconvincingly I might add, with some dark and shadowy visuals. You will hear many Lupin fans grumbling about how Cagliostro forever changed the Lupin series' aesthetic and tone after its release, and this is one of the more direct examples of that. I guess the ending reveal is effective, although it is telegraphed pretty hard. It turns out that this young girl who says she's been trapped in the hotel for so long is actually a real ghost. It's pretty damning that this character journey completely erases the hotel owner and his daughter from the picture. They're not even in the wrap-up or anything. You can definitely tell that Carla is a spirit, especially with the cold open and how they frame her, but the way Lupin discovers what happened and reacts to it is pretty heartfelt. Not many Lupin stories deal with dead kids, and this one handles it in an artful way, which I do like. That is one of the few things that I like about this episode though, because it is kind of a mess. It's hard to tell what it wants to be, aside from an obvious Cagliostro copycat. But what it lacks in living up to that masterpiece, it also lacks in mystery, intrigue, scares, and really that much to enjoy in it. Not that it's terrible or anything, but it falls too far into that generic side of Lupin. And if you're looking for a standout Halloween episode starring your favorite gentleman thief, you'll want to look elsewhere. So happy November, I guess, and sorry for the infinite delay on the Part 1 episode's ranked video. It's coming out soon, I promise. And let me know which episodes you'd like to see me review next. For now though, thanks for watching.